So I'm just going to give you a heads up. If you have health anxiety or you're a bit anxious at the moment, then I'd probably just recommend watching this video at a later date, just so you're aware. It can be quite triggering for some people if they've gone through the same thing from like Headway. If you've seen my page, then I just thought I'd give you the heads up before I go any further. A lot of people have been really intrigued into my weight loss and like my journey, and I did make it very clear that a lot of people don't see what happens behind closed doors. So I thought I'd just make a page of awareness for people that are in similar situations like me, and have had experiences that literally shape them completely differently to anything you'd ever think of. So I basically woke up one morning. I wasn't at home, which was a bit scary, and I woke up with a severe bang in my head. It basically felt like someone had just stamped on my head. I couldn't really open my eyes, I couldn't see light. It was such like severe pain that it made me want to just throw up. After a couple of hours, I took some paracetamols, and to start with, they eased it a little bit, but they didn't really touch the sides. But I was in an environment where I was trying really hard not to be dramatic or silly, and I was trying to enjoy my time because I do have a bit of health anxiety. So at the time, I think I was just trying to push myself to like enjoy the day, and I don't know how I managed it. I was in Nottingham at the time with my friend's mum. When I got into the car was when the real pain started. I remember pulling out of the car park and just having my hands in my head and literally not being able to look up, hardly being able to speak. Every movement of that car, I felt like I honestly thought I was going to be sick so much. And Nottingham's quite a fair way home to get to Stowmarket as well. So I literally had my hands in my head like this with a scarf over my eyes because I was so sensitive to light. A couple of hours obviously went past, and I remember asking for my mum. My mum turned up, she came and got me, and we went back home at this point. As the night went on, obviously my mum realised that something evidently wasn't right because I wasn't talking, and for anyone that really knows me, I'm quite a chatty person, so for me to go quiet, there definitely is something not right. I remember her calling for an ambulance, and at this point the pain in my head had really eased. Like, it had been a good 6 hours of pure agony, to the point where I was trying so hard to just try to hide the pain that I was in because I just didn't want to make a scene. And then obviously as the time went on, mum obviously realised as soon as she got me. I was only with mum for about 40 minutes and she'd already called for an ambulance. But at that point I was sitting up and I was talking to mum. I was very out of breath and I was very, very exhausted. And I remember the ambulance coming and them talking to me. They were really lovely, and they kept taking my blood pressure. And every time I stood up, or even when I was sitting down, they couldn't balance my blood pressure. Like, it was so low, like really dangerously low. No matter what they gave me, nothing was taking my blood pressure up. And obviously I explained to them the pain that I'd experienced and was experiencing, and right away they were like, "We're taking you in." I remember thinking, "Oh, it's just a real bad migraine, like it's okay." And I got to Ipswich Hospital really quickly, like they blue lighted me there. But obviously when you first go, sometimes in hospitals, because they're so busy, I was left on my bed, like in the hallway. It was a very, very busy night, and the staff were rushing around everywhere. And I remember hearing a lot of noise, and it was so intense. Like, anyone speaking to me, any sound, any movement, anyone jolting, anything near me, and I remember the lights in the hospital. I remember asking us to just turn the lights off, like, you're making me ill, like just turn them off, I need darkness, like. And I remember at one point the nurse wheeled me into a private room, and I was seen very quickly by the consultant or the doctor who was obviously on shift. Before he came in, I was offered a lot of pain relief. I had 10 mil of morphine straight away, and then a couple of other tablets that came with it. And I remember like questioning the nurse, being like, am I meant to have this much? Like, that's quite a lot of tablets, because I'm not big on taking my tablets. But I obviously just took them. And I remember being high as a kite. Like, I remember feeling such weird pains in my head, but I remember just feeling space. I was high. And I remember the doctor coming in and like me just smiling away at him, because I was just on this level of relaxed as much as I could be in a painful situation. It was very weird. And I remember him coming in and he said, on a scale of 1 to 10, talk me through what happened. And I remember saying it was like something had just, like a bomb had just gone off in my head, like a bang. Like I heard like a bang, like, and the pain was a 10. Like, I have never ever experienced any sort of pain like it. Like, I couldn't do anything. And I remember seeing his face like, okay, like something's not right. And he took me down to, sometimes when you stay in hospital, when they're not sure 100% what ward to take you on, you kind of go, it's kind of like a waiting area, is what I can sum it up for. And I remember that night they wheeled me, and because I'd obviously had so much morphine and drugs and like laying down, and my head, like I wasn't having enough oxygen to come through when they were wheeling me. I got real trapped wind in my chest, and I made them do an ECG. I was like, I'm gonna die, like you need to give, like I'm having a heart attack, something's not right. But it wasn't. It was luckily just real bad trapped wind in your chest. And I don't know if you've had that, but that and a real bad head is just not a combination I'd want to mix together. So as the night went, Mum stayed with me, and I remember asking for my dad and my sister and my brother at this point. And I remember the next morning a trainee nurse was like, we've got a CT scan. For anyone that doesn't know, that is a brain scan. It's shaped like a polo, if you've ever had like a polo suite. It's basically a massive one of them. That's what it looks like. And I remember her being like, can you walk down there? And I was thinking, yeah, like I can walk, of course I can walk. Like, and as I got out of the bed, luckily she caught me, and I remember not being able to walk. Like, I couldn't even stand up on my own. And they quickly, like loads of nurses obviously ran to help and got me in a wheelchair. And I remember just standing up, I was exhausted. Like a type of exhaustion that I'd never experienced. I remember like being really out of breath, and the nurse was so apologetic, but obviously she wasn't to know and I wasn't to know. It was literally no one's fault. It wasn't an error on their part. I generally thought I was capable of walking. So I was wheeled down for my first brain scan, and they helped me onto the bed, and obviously everyone has to leave because obviously the radiation, they stand behind a mirror. And I remember laying there and just having like a tear come down my face and just thinking, oh gosh, like what are they going to find? And I remember that was over pretty quickly. Like it was 5, maybe 10 minutes, if that. And I was wheeled back to where I was obviously staying at the moment, at the meantime. And I remember them wheeling me and me seeing my dad down the corridor and him smiling, and then me literally, like his face just dropped when he saw me, because he obviously realised that I wasn't very well. And one thing that he tended to do quite a lot was do this constantly on my head. I don't know why he decided that was a helpful thing to do, because someone with like pain in their head. You pushing on it really doesn't help. But I remember him doing that and him literally being like, she's burning up, like, can we get her on some more medication? And they did. They were really, really quick. I was on a drip as well because I was so dehydrated. Even though like I was drinking loads, I just couldn't get my water up and like feeling hydrated. I just couldn't do it. As the day went on, like I was starting to feel a little bit better. Like I was talking to my dad, my sister, my mum at this point. And then I remember a nurse coming in being like, we've got your room ready. And we were all shocked. We were all very like, I thought we were going home. And they were like, we need to run some further tests on you. And at this point, I hadn't had my results from my brain scan. So I was literally like, oh, they've obviously found something. And obviously they wheeled me down. And I was really happy about the room. Like I had my own room, my own shower. And I was really content with that because I'm not very good at seeing like people on wards like when they're really poorly. Like I just prefer to just close off and not look because sometimes it makes me feel like anxious and I get like a tight chest. Obviously I got to the room, my brain scan, my CT scan came back clear, which was fantastic, but they were like, we need to run a further test, which is a lumbar puncture. Now, for anyone that doesn't know, a lumbar puncture is when you lay on your side, you're awake, and a long needle is injected into your spinal cord. And it's basically to take fluid out of your spine to do some tests on it to see if there's anything in the spinal fluid that has been passed down over the couple of days that hasn't shown in the brain scan, but is in there. So I remember bursting into tears and my mum ringing my brother, and James came straight away and he was like, you've got this, like you can do it. And I remember thinking, yeah, like I'll do it. Like I've got dad. Like, so I had my lumbar puncture and I had 5 mil off like what a human body can take. I think it's anesthetic. Like there's only 5 more mil that I could have, and then like you can't physically put it any more in. And my lumbar puncture failed. They couldn't get the spinal fluid out of my spine, which was quite frustrating. I was in there for a very long time, and obviously you can't move because something's in your spine. And then I remember him giving me an electrical drip at this point because I felt so weird after that. Like this was like day 4 and I'd still have real bad like shooty pains in my head. It wasn't as intense as obviously day 1, but it was still there. And the exhaustion, like I could get to the bathroom and to have a shower, there was a seat, and I'd barely be able to wash myself or do anything. And I remember hiding it from like the nurses and stuff because I just didn't want to be a pain. Like I just thought, this is just a real bad migraine. Like it's just a bad situation. Like I just tried to be really like positive. But that failed. So basically that means that I needed to have a lumbar puncture under scans and like radiation and things like that they have to like move it over. So they basically were waiting for a slot for that to happen. So I was rushed in the next day for that because obviously I don't know if someone cancelled or whatever it was. There was a spot that came up. I went down with dad, but obviously he wasn't allowed in because of the radiation and the impact that can have on him. So I obviously laid on my side again with this machine that would go like round and like lift up and round. And I remember feeling a lot more anxious than what I did the first time because I didn't have someone with me talking. And obviously the big injection, because they'd obviously bruised my back and my spine from the day before, and they obviously had to go back into that. So that was really painful until they got the numbing in. But it turns out that my spinal fluid was just a little bit higher than what it normally is, which I'm not surprised. So yeah, they got the spinal fluid out, and then basically after lumbar puncture, you're not allowed to move for 4 hours. Like I didn't move a muscle. Anyone who knows me, I was actually like in my bed, like not moving. If you need the toilet, you have to use a bedpan, like you're not allowed out. So I was wheeled back and I was whacked. At this point, I just had no energy whatsoever. I basically, a couple of hours later, the test was obviously come back, and I was with my Uncle Clive, my Auntie Cilla and my mum, and they were literally leaving. As they were leaving, the doctor who was obviously overseeing all my case, he was outside, and I heard him to my mum be like, you might want to come in for this, like you might want to come. And then I remember hearing mum be like, what, like what's happening? And then he was like, you need to kind of come in. And I remember my eyes just like so awake, like I can't even explain, and I just knew that they'd found something and something wasn't right. And he was really nice as obviously you can be when you're given bad news. He basically was like, we've found a lot of blood in your spinal fluid, which means you've had a hemorrhage bleed in your brain. We can't work out where the bleed is, why you've had the bleed, or anything, but they sent all my paperwork off to Adam Brooks, who are the brain specialists, to oversee obviously their recommendations. He was like, we've got to move you to a high risk ward in Ipswich because you need to be I should have been monitored like every couple of hours, like on the hours, because obviously with things like that anything can change really, really quickly. Obviously I burst into tears, and there was a lot of different emotions that I don't really want to touch on. Like I feel like I'm going to keep that for my family and me and anyone who I wish to share with at a later date. 5 minutes later, he basically I remember him in my eyes with like a light looking upwards and down, and he was obviously sending it as they were talking. My blood pressure was getting checked. Everything moved really, really quickly. Within 5 minutes, a lot of tests on my arms and my body were done. And I remember asking for my brother and my sister, and they come very, very quickly. And then I remember him coming in within 7 minutes of like a response. Not even that, I think it was a lot quicker, to be honest. And Adam Brooks had basically replied straight away and was like, she needs to be blue lighted to Adam Brooks now. Within like 15 minutes, an ambulance was there, and I remember being taken down to the ambulance with like my brother, my sister and my mum all behind me. And I remember not looking at, like trying really hard not to look in anyone's eyes, because obviously everyone is like, you've got this, like they're really trying, but I feel like you can tell a lot by someone's eyes. And like, so I was really trying to just stay focused. Like I was like, don't look, like you've got this. And obviously mum was in the ambulance with me. I was blue lighted to Adam Brooks. We were there so quickly. I was taken to A4 ward. You can Google that, it's on the NHS website. At Adam Brooks, it's basically a neurosurgery ward which specialises in brain and spinal cord injuries, or like cancers and things like that. As soon as I got on the ward, like it's a completely different environment than I'd ever experienced. Like there was a lot of sick people on that ward. And within the first 20 minutes of me being there, my dad and my mum had to leave because it was night time. Like we had arrived late at night. I think it was about 8, maybe 9. And obviously when you come to a certain age, you can't be on wards. I was then within 15 minutes taken for my first CT scan at Adam Brooks, but they used a dye in my head. So basically you have like something put into your arm, and you stay really, really still, they obviously leave, and then they shoot up the dye into your brain, and it basically just makes your arteries in your brain and like your organs like just like clearer, so they can have like a proper look to see if like there's any arteries that are smaller or an aneurysm or anything like that in there. It burns, so like you get a sensation where like it's like a burning feeling, and it makes you feel like you're going to wee yourself, but obviously you don't. You just have to stay really still, because if you don't, you'll give them an unclear result, and then they'll just have to keep doing it until you do it. So I wasn't moving. I was then taken back on to my ward, and I remember feeling very alone and scared. About 3 hours later, I was awoken by like 5 different surgeons around my bed, and they were just going through that they'd not found anything in the CT scan, which was really good, but they're worried that there's an aneurysm that could be in my brain, and that's why I've had a bleed. And I remember them saying, we're going to have to run some further tests. We'll let you know in the morning what tests like we're going to do. They told I had a lot of information, and to be honest, like I don't really know how I took it in, or even if I did take it in, I don't really know. That night, I just remember crying and just wanting like my mum, my dad, my brother and my sister. The next morning, I was put on bed bound, so I weren't allowed to sit up. I wasn't allowed to leave my bed. If I needed the toilet, I'd use a commode or a bedpan. The first couple of days they let me use the commode because I just felt so uncomfortable in a bedpan. I don't know if anyone's ever used them, but they're really hard to go to the toilet in. I had to constantly drink. Like, that's one thing they said to me. They were like, make sure you're drinking loads. And that was like my goal. I was literally like, that's like, I would drink so much water. I was like, that's the only thing I think I had to focus on that kept me, I don't know, going a little bit. They didn't do a drip at Addenbrooke's. They were like, you can drink, like you can get your blood pressure up. As the day went on, someone came in, a doctor obviously came and said that the test that we need to do, now I don't know how to pronounce this, so it's called an angiography. I don't know, I will put it down below how to actually spell it, but long story short, it's they insert, you lay really flat, they insert a little tube as thin as your hair into your main artery in your leg while you're awake, and it goes up to about here, and they squirt 16 different chemicals into your brain while you're like laying there, like, and you can't move. And I remember him going through the procedure of the pros and cons of having it, and what I had to sign and the risks that come with it. I don't know what day I was on by this point, but I hadn't eaten. That I wasn't allowed to eat anything because obviously they were preparing me for surgery, for brain surgery. Because if they found an aneurysm, they'd have to act on it there and then. Like, there was no wait. And I remember feeling so weak, like I hadn't eaten. I actually remember saying to one of the nurses, like, are you starving me? Like, am I going to die? And she was like, you can go 3 weeks. And I thought, 3 weeks? I've gone like 3 days and I'm dying. But yeah. So that was the procedure. So I remember signing it, and I remember being really, really upset and looking at my brother, and he'd brought me a teddy from the hospital, and I remember him sitting there with me and was like, you have an option, Meg. You either don't have it and you could have an aneurysm which could burst at any point and potentially kill you, or you have it and you make sure that if there is something, we can deal with it and we'll deal with it together. And I remember crying to James and be like, yeah, like, and I signed. And that day, you don't know when it's going to come, because as soon as there's a spot, you're rushed in, like there's no waiting. I just remember crying that whole day. Like I had no energy. I'd had enough of everything. I then went down for that procedure. I was in there for about 2 hours, and I remember not saying a word. Not one word. The lady was really, really nice. And then after the procedure, she basically has to hold your groin for 30 minutes. And you're not allowed to move, because obviously it can cause blood clots and a stroke, which is very dangerous. So yeah, and then I was wheeled back onto my A4 ward, and the pain in my head was excruciating. I'd had a hemorrhage bleed. I then had the pain of 2 lumbar punctures, and then I had the pain of all the different chemicals that were just squirted in my head, and I was in agony. Like morphine didn't even touch the sides to how much pain I was in. And I remember just holding my head and not knowing where to look or what to do. But yeah, then a couple of hours after, he came up and he was like, there's no aneurysm. We don't know why you've had a bleed on your brain. We can't work out where it's come from. Sometimes in life things happen, but you need to make sure you start living again. Like, let this go now. Like, focus on yourself, get yourself healthy. And I remember just saying thank you like 100 times. Like that's the only word I think I could basically do. And he basically was like, you can stay in hospital for like a couple more days. Like you're going to need full-time care. And when he said that, I didn't realize to the extent of what he meant. Like, I didn't understand how hard it is to recover from a bleed on the brain, but I discharged myself there and then. I'd been on blood thinning tablets every 2 hours. I'd been woken up. I'd been monitored for the past 7 weeks. I honestly had enough. Like, mentally, I couldn't physically stand one more night in a hospital. I was in pain and I just needed silence for my head. So I discharged myself, which was a very silly thing for me to have done. Sorry, Mum, because you had to deal with it. And that is my illness. I'm obviously gonna cover some of my recovery, and some of the things it left me with. But for now, I'm just gonna leave you with that information of what actually happened. Obviously, I've summed it up very quickly, and I've taken a lot of my emotion out of this situation, because for me, for this page, like, I want it to be a place where someone understands that I've had it. Like, I get how they feel, but I want it to be a place of growth, and in time I will share that. But at the moment, I don't want to relive them feelings, and when sometimes I speak about it to this extent, it can do that. So if I come in across quite cold in it, that's why. But that is my journey of the hospital in a nutshell.